Howdy, and welcome to the F-18 in DCS. In this series of videos, I'm not going to call it a tutorial because I'm going to be learning with you. I've got very little experience in combat flight sims. I have flown in Microsoft Flight Simulator and X-Plane, but this is my first real experience in DCS. So I'm going to learn along with you the operation of this aircraft, and we can go from a very basic understanding of what it can do to operating it in a combat environment, in air-to-air dogfights, and dropping bombs accurately. So let's get started.
What you think about when you're born into a fire? Let them burn it out. Sell them to the richest buyer.
So here we are then, in the F-18 cockpit, flying over the Caracas region. This place looks fairly daunting, doesn't it? I'm not going to lie. There's a lot of gauges, switches, controls all over the place. Today, in this first video, we're going to have a quick look around this cockpit and look at the important controls and switches. We'll discuss those controls and switches and how they work and what they operate in further videos. Today we just want to get acquainted with the cockpit and understand what's going on in it. So we'll start from the left console back here. So if we look at the back of the console, the first thing we can see there is the OBOG switch, or the onboard oxygen generation system. We need that switched on so the pilot can breathe at high altitudes. Looking forward to that is our instrument landing system controls. On the left hand side is to select which channel your ILS is on. In front of that is your volume controls for all your audio systems. Forward of that is our FCS controls. On the left hand side we've got the rudder trim with a button on top of that for takeoff trim. And on the right hand side we've got the flight control system restart, which we'll cover when we do our startup and shutdown tutorials. On the left hand side of that then we've got the engine crank switches for starting the left and right engines, and the switch to turn on and off the auxiliary power unit, which we use for starting the engines. On the fuel panel to the right hand side, the leftmost switch on there is the fuel probe. Select forward for extend and rear for emergency extend. The center position is for retract. Just inside that then we've got the two switches for the control of the external tanks, and inboard of that we've got the fuel dump switch. Looking slightly further forward then, we've got our lighting control panel circled there. If we look a little bit closer, the switch at the rear is for our strobes. We then have a rotating dial for our position lights. If we pull the throttles back slightly, we've got a rotating dial in front of that for our formation lights. Moving up the left hand side then, on this panel, top left, we've got our launch bar. That's for takeoffs on the carrier. Inboard of that is our flaps controls. Generally when you're flying you're going to have that set in auto. Half for taking off and full for landing. Below that we have our landing and taxi light switch, and inboard of that is our anti-skid switch. Now when we're landing on carrier we need the anti-skid system switched off, and when we're landing at an airfield we're going to have that switched on. Bottom left is the hook bypass. Again, select the position depending on whether you're landing on the carrier or landing at an airfield. The big yellow and black handle circled there is the emergency brake or the parking brake. We twist and pull that to engage the parking brake, and twist and push it to disengage. And above that is a rotating dial for the selective jettison. We can get rid of any external stores. So if we look on the outside of the aircraft at the minute, we've got a couple of bombs on there. We can get rid of those by a selection on there and pressing the big red button. Again, we'll go through that in a later video. Moving up to the left then, we've got the canopy jettison handle. You don't want to be pulling that in flight unless you're in an emergency. And just behind that, that big red lollipop is our undercarriage handle. The yellow and black switch there that says push to jet is our emergency jettison button. We push that and it gets rid of everything on the aircraft, apart from the missiles that are on the wingtips. Above that is our master arm switch. If that's set to safe, then we can't fire or drop anything. And above that is our air to ground and air to air mode switches. Okay, up front. As you can see, we've got 3 display screens. We've got the left DDI, or digital display indicator. We've got the right DDI. And the one down the bottom is called the AMPCD, or Advanced Multi-Purpose Color Display. The one at the bottom is the only one we can use in color, so that's the only one we can display the map on. This is where you're going to see most of your sensor data. So we've got, for example, on the left-hand one, we can have our radar display. If we've got a targeting pod, we can use one of the screens to display the targeting pod. This will show us all our waypoints, obviously the map down the bottom. And again, we'll go into these in more detail in future videos. If we look just to the bottom left of the left-hand DDI, we can see there our IFEI, or Integrated Fuel and Engine Indicator. On the left-hand side of that, obviously we can see engine written there. The top part is the engine RPM. So if I move the throttles back, or if I move the throttles backwards, you can see the RPM drop off. If I move them back forwards again, you can see the RPM climbing again. Below that is the engine temperature, or the exhaust temperature. Below that is our fuel flow, how much fuel we're using per hour. So that's 47 times 100 pounds per hour. And below that is our nozzle position. The very bottom there, we have got our engine oil pressure. On the right hand side is our fuel information. So the standard setup on the fuel is, the top is all the fuel we've got in the aircraft. So currently we've got 13,470 pounds. The figure below that is the internal fuel of the aircraft. What that's showing us at the minute then is we've got external tanks on, and we've got an extra couple of £1,000 in our external tanks. The number below that reads 0 at the minute is our bingo fuel. We can adjust this as desired, and what that will do is give us a bingo warning when we reach that amount of fuel in the fuel tanks. And below that is the time. So this big keypad in the middle is what we call our upfront controller. This does a number of functions for us. We can interact with the DDIs, input in information such as our laser targeting codes for our pod, and also it controls our radios, autopilot. We can use it for TACAN, which we'll go through in a later video, our instrument landing system, data link between different aircrafts. So this is basically the control center for all our information input in the aircraft. Above that we've got the HUD then, or head-up display. This is the primary way, without looking down at all our instruments, we can tell what is going on with our aircraft. So looking right at the top then, we have our aircraft heading scale. On the little triangle there indicates in which direction our aircraft is flying. So if we turn to the left, you can see the heading tape moving. Just below that then, we have the aircraft pitch ladder. So the center line with no numbers is when we are flying straight and level. If you can see above that, the line with 5, and the dashed line below that with 5. If we put our little aeroplane, which is called our velocity vector, on those lines, then the nose will be climbing at 5 degrees or descending at 5 degrees. The velocity vector then is where our aircraft is pointing. On the left hand side there, you can see 385. That is our current airspeed in knots. But below that is our angle of attack, the angle of our aircraft in relation to the air flowing over the wings. Below that is our Mach number. So currently we're doing 0.59 times the speed of sound. And below that is our accelerometer, which measures the amount of G-force we're pulling. The scale right at the bottom there with the little triangle indicates our bank angle. So if we bank the aircraft, you can see the triangle moving over. And we put it back in the center again, and we can bank to the other side as well. Coming up the right hand side then, the box number on the right hand side is our altitude in feet. So currently we're at 1,210 feet, and the number above that is our vertical velocity, or how quick we are climbing or descending. So if you look at that number, currently 110, so we are climbing at 110 feet per minute. If it's a negative number, then we're descending at that same speed. So down here then, we have our backup analog gauges. We're only really going to use these in emergency if we've lost all our other ways of telling which way up we are and how fast we're going. So the top left is our standby attitude indicator. That's going to tell us if we're climbing or descending and turning. Below that to the left is our airspeed in knots. The one in the centre at the bottom is our altitude, and the one bottom right is our standby vertical velocity indicator that's telling us whether we're climbing or descending. Currently it's right on the 0, so we're not climbing or descending. The one above that is our radar warning receiver, which we'll talk through in a later date. On the right hand side then, we have the dial for our helmet mounted display, and above that is the switch for cooling for our AIM-9 sidewinders. Moving down to the right hand side of the cockpit then. So these switches here are for our sensors. The dial on the right hand side for our inertial navigation system, which we'll talk about when we do our start up and shutdown video. The switch on the left hand side is for our radar. The FLIR is a forward looking infrared sensor switch. In the centre is our laser targeting designator ranger switch, so that's whether we've armed the laser or not. And the switch on the right hand side is the laser spot tracker navigation forward looking infrared sensor, which we'll go through those sensors at a later date. In front of that we have our internal lights, so our cockpit lights. Again, these are all dials. Get in your cockpit and have a play with them. In front of this is our ECS controls, or environmental control system. We can, if we like, switch to all manual modes and control the temperature inside the aircraft as we see fit. The important one on this panel is our pitot heat and our engine anti-ice. And the three switches in front of that, the center one is battery, and the two outboard switches are for our engine driven generators. So just under our center screen, or the AMPCD, this row of buttons here is for our ALR 67 radar warning receiver, and if we turn that on using the right hand button, it makes a lovely noise. I love that noise. The switch below that is for our electronic countermeasures. Again, we're going to get into that at a later date. On the left hand side of that is our dispenser switch for our chaff and flares for evading missiles. And below that is our auxiliary release switch, which enables jettison of hung stores if we have any issues with firing off weapons. So that was a quick tour around our F-18 cockpit. Now, I'm not going to lie to you, I'm still pretty confused as to what all these switches and buttons and controls do in here. So hopefully over the next few videos we can delve a bit deeper into how the systems operate and get to grips with everything that happens in here. In the next video we're going to start up and shut down this beast before we go flying and after we land, and hopefully we'll have a better understanding of what some of this stuff does in here. Anyway, thanks for taking the time to watch this. Like and subscribe, and I'll see you for the next one.
What you think about